So now we're going to talk about the baptism of Constantine, which next to the baptism of Jesus is probably the most significant and important baptism in the history of Christianity. Augustine's baptism by Ambrose is probably up there. It would be in the top 5, but this is probably number 2 after the baptism of Jesus. And so we'll talk about why. He's a Roman general, and he's stationed in, of all places, where is Constantine stationed as a Roman general? That's right, it's Britain. I throw her these softballs.
I thought London or Londinium.
Yeah, Londinium.
Liverpool. No, look for the south.
So Constantine's stationed in Britain, of all things. There is no England at this point.
Oh.
And he's sometimes referred to as the savior of Christianity. So why is he called the savior of Christianity? Because prior to Constantine, maybe 10% of the Roman Empire was Christian. Maybe. After Constantine became emperor, 100% of the Roman Empire was Christian. So if we want to look at the most significant people in the spread of Christianity, we might put Paul first because of his missionary journeys, but Constantine has to be number 2 because in terms of mass numbers, it wouldn't be until Billy Graham and Pat Robertson 1900 years later that you had as many new converts. In 312, Constantine decides enough of this hanging out in Britain thing, and he decides he wants to be emperor. So he marches on Rome against Maxentius, who is the Roman emperor. And he's outnumbered 4-1 as he's approaching the gates of Rome. And Rome is a heavily fortified position. Maxentius's forces vastly outnumber the forces of Constantine, and it seems like Constantine doesn't have a chance. And under normal circumstances, we probably wouldn't even know this person's name. There certainly wouldn't be a major city in Turkey named after him. Used to be. Constantinople. Then he has an interesting vision, and he will say later, and all that's included in this section, he will say later is because of that vision, he was able to win. So here we are. This is from Eusebius, or if you're British, Eusebius. And we're most familiar with Eusebius in this class because he wrote the first history of the church, which he cleverly called church history or ecclesiastical history. When you write the first, you can do that. But he also wrote a pretty important book called The Life of the Blessed Emperor Constantine. I like the use of the blessed. If anybody in here ever writes a biography of me after I die, I like the life of the blessed Robert Jones would be acceptable to me as I hover from above.
Blessed brother, Robert.
That's why we don't throw out the rolls, Linda.
So this is Eusebius, how while he was praying, God sent him a vision of a cross of light in the heavens at midday, with an inscription admonishing him to conquer by that. So here is the description of what happened. It's the only, or it's the closest thing we have to a first-person account of this event, because Eusebius certainly was a contemporary of Constantine at the time. Accordingly, he called on him with earnest prayer and supplications that he would reveal to him who he was, and stretch forth his right hand to help him in his present difficulties. And while he was thus praying with a fervent entreaty, a most marvelous sign appeared to him from heaven, the account of which it might have been hard to believe had it been related by any other person. So that's kind of interesting. I mean, Eusebius is saying, you know, anybody else other than the emperor told me this. I don't know that I'd believe. Kind of interesting. He said that about noon, when the day was already beginning to decline, he saw with his own eyes the trophy of a cross of light in the heavens above the sun, and bearing the inscription, "Conquer by this." At this sight he himself was struck with amazement, and his whole army also, which followed him on this expedition, and witnessed the miracle. So it wasn't Constantine who saw it by himself. His whole army saw this cross in the sky, and the conquer by this. So this is the key moment in the growth of the church. is Constantine has this vision. After having a similar vision of Christ in his sleep, Constantine makes the priests of God his counselors. So all those bishops that are hanging around from the early days of the church that have passed down through the ages, suddenly they're called upon to become Constantine's counselors. And he deemed it incumbent on him to honor the God who had appeared to him with all devotion. And after this, being fortified by well-grounded hopes in him, he hastened to quench the threatening fire of tyranny. And in what can only be described as a miracle, Constantine defeats Maxentius and he takes over the Western Empire. And the reason I say that it is a miracle is Maxentius is a military commander. He's a Western Roman emperor. And he commits one of the most stupid military moves in the history of warfare. He brings his troops out from the fortified city. So Rome is like one of the most fortified cities in the world. He takes his troops out of the fortified walls and then puts them with their back to a river. And Constantine attacks and slaughters them, and they're trying to escape, and oh, there's a river there! So it really is an amazing scene. At the time Constantine does this, there's actually two emperors, an Eastern emperor and a Western emperor. And Constantine, by 324, he also takes over the Eastern Empire. So he is the first emperor, consolidated emperor of the Roman Empire in 40 years.
Well, just
so Constantine converts. He kind of puts Eusebius in unofficial charge of the church at that point. He never officially becomes pope or something like that. But Eusebius is his buddy, and while it's good to be king, it's also good to be the king's buddy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Even better, less responsibility.
Hold his clothes.
So while he becomes a strong supporter of Christianity, he puts off being baptized until he's on his deathbed. Why would he put off being baptized? There's all that messy stuff about
Yeah, that
how
messy stuff.
you're cleansed of the sins you've committed up to that point. But then you're supposed to lead a sinless life after that.
Yeah, he's busy being emperor of Rome.
He's emperor of Rome,
business.
and what becomes Constantinople. The last thing in the world he wants is to have to lead a pure life. So it was a common practice in the 4th century. You wanted to avoid having to live a pure life until you were at a point where you really couldn't sin much anymore. You know, while you're on your death.
Everything was dead. Yeah, he didn't have the strength to sin anymore.
You can still have impure thoughts, I suppose.
Absolutely.
You couldn't do anything about it. Continuing with Eusebius, being at length convinced that his life was drawing to a close, he felt the time was come at which he should seek purification from the sins of his past career, firmly believing that whatever errors he had committed as a mortal man, his soul would be purified from them through the efficacy of the mystical words and the salutary waters of baptism. After this, he proceeded as far as the suburbs of Nicomedia, and there, having summoned the bishops to meet him. So it's a very conscious decision to put this off. Constantine's own description: the time has arrived which I had long hoped for, with an earnest desire and prayer that I might obtain the salvation of God. The hour is coming in which I too may have the blessing of that seal which confers immortality, the hour in which I may receive the seal of salvation. I thought to do this in the waters of the river Jordan, wherein our Savior, for our example, is recorded to have been baptized. That's a good, he knows a little bit about theology.
Yeah.
He said that. Is recorded to have been baptized. But God, who knows what is expedient for us, is pleased that I should receive this. Eusebius ends this discussion. Thus was Constantine the first of all sovereigns who was regenerated and a church dedicated to the martyrs of Christ, thus gifted with a divine seal of baptism. So Eusebius realized the momentous thing that had just happened.